My name is Julie Dutcher, and I am 43 years old. Until last month, I believed I had a solid, ordinary life, the kind built slowly, quietly, over years of shared routines and compromises. I believed I was legally married to my husband, that our history was documented, official, real. 12 years together, 11 of those as husband and wife. I would have said I knew him better than anyone else in the world. That confidence was the first thing to shatter. The phone rang in the middle of an unremarkable workday, one of those afternoons where time blurs into emails and half-finished thoughts. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I answered out of habit, expecting a robocall or a wrong number. Hello. There was a brief pause, the kind that makes you suddenly aware of your own breathing. Then a woman spoke, steady, controlled, not angry, not hysterical. Is this the woman who married my husband? I frowned, already irritated. I think you've got the wrong number. No, she said calmly. You married him about 11 years ago. City Hall. Small ceremony. My stomach tightened. That detail was too specific. Who is this? I asked. I'm the woman he's still legally married to. The words didn't make sense at first. They slid past my mind without landing. I waited for the correction, the laugh, the apology. That's not possible, I said. His ex-wife died years ago. Car accident. There was a quiet exhale on the other end, not mocking, almost tired. That's what he told you. A chill crept up my arms. Who are you? I asked again. Slower this time, my voice no longer steady. I'm his wife, she said. 17 years. We never divorced. I felt lightheaded, like the room had tilted slightly off its axis. You're saying my marriage isn't real. I'm saying it's not legal, she replied. You can't marry someone who's already married. That makes it bigamy. The word hit me hard, sharp and clinical, like a diagnosis. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat frozen at my desk, staring at my computer screen as if it might explain what had just happened. This had to be a scam, an elaborate lie. People didn't maintain deceptions like this for over a decade. Not real people, not my husband. An hour later, my hands shaking despite myself, I called the number back. She answered immediately. I know how insane this sounds, she said before I could speak. I didn't believe it either at first. I tried to file for divorce so I could remarry. The system flagged it. That's how I found you. She emailed me documents while we were on the phone. A marriage certificate, her passport, recent photos, dates, names. Proof that she was alive, very much alive, and still legally tied to the man I called my husband. Piece by piece, the story came out. They married young. He left years later, said he needed space, said it was temporary, promised he'd come back. Then he disappeared, changed his number, started over. With me. Legally, she said quietly, you're the second victim. Second victim. The phrase lodged in my chest, heavy and suffocating. I drove home that night in a fog, every memory replaying itself with new meaning. The vague answers about his past. The stories that never quite lined up. The necklace he wore with a ring threaded onto a chain, supposedly in memory of a dead wife. I had felt sympathy. I had felt honored by his trust. When I walked into the house, he was on the couch watching television like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't just cracked open. Hey, he said, smiling. How was your day? I set my bag down slowly. I got a call, I said. From your wife. The remote slipped from his hand and hit the floor. His face went completely white. I can explain, he whispered. He didn't move at first. He just stared at me, mouth slightly open, like a man caught mid-breath underwater. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the low murmur of the television still playing some forgettable sitcom laugh track that suddenly felt obscene. Explain, I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was too calm, too controlled, like something was bracing itself deep inside my chest. He bent down slowly and picked up the remote, then set it on the coffee table, as if that small act of normalcy might ground him. It didn't. I never thought this would come up, he said finally. That sentence did it. Not, I'm sorry. Not, I lied. Just this. You told me she was dead, I said. You cried when you told me. You showed me the necklace. You let me feel guilty for even asking questions. His eyes filled immediately. Full tears. Red-rimmed, practiced, familiar. I'd seen this version of him before during arguments, during moments when he needed forgiveness more than accountability. I didn't know how to tell you, he said, his voice breaking. I was young. I panicked. I thought it was over. You thought a marriage just expires, I asked. He shook his head quickly. No. Yes, I don't know. We separated. She disappeared. I assumed. You assumed, I repeated. So you decided to marry me. He stood up then, pacing the room, running his hands through his hair. We built a life together. We are married in every way that matters. No, I said quietly. We're not. That stopped him. He turned to face me, anger flashing briefly through the panic. Don't say that. It's the truth, I said. Legally, I'm not your wife. I'm just someone you lived with. Someone you let believe a lie for 11 years. That's not fair, he snapped. We have a house. We have joint accounts. We planned a future. You planned a future, I said. I consented to one that didn't exist. He dropped onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. Please, he said. Don't call the police. Don't do anything drastic. We can fix this. Fix this? How I asked. By finally divorcing her now, after lying to me for over a decade. He looked up at me, then desperate. I love you. The words landed hollow, stripped of weight. You loved having someone who didn't ask too many questions, I said. You loved convenience. That's not true. Isn't it, I asked? Because another woman just called me and said, I'm your second victim. His breath hitched. She had no right. She had every right, I cut in. She was your wife. She still is. Silence fell again. Heavier this time. I looked around the living room, the furniture we picked out together, the framed photos, the small domestic details that suddenly felt like props in a set. You stole my agency, I said. You let me commit to a life under false pretenses. He stood up abruptly. I didn't do this to hurt you. That almost makes it worse, I said. I grabbed my laptop, my charger, the essentials. He followed me to the door, voice rising, panic sharpening into something edged with anger. You're overreacting. I turned back to him slowly. You committed a felony, I said, and you let me believe I was your wife. As I stepped outside, he called after me. Please come back. We can talk. I didn't answer. I checked into a hotel that night and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at my phone, knowing deep down that whatever I thought my marriage was, it had never truly existed. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I drifted in and out, mine replaying the same moments on a loop, the necklace around his neck, the way he'd flinched when I said your wife, the casual confidence with which he'd told me I was overreacting. By morning, shock had curdled into something heavier and sharper. I called a lawyer as soon as offices opened. I explained everything slowly, carefully, half expecting to be interrupted with disbelief. Instead, the attorney listened in silence, then sighed. You can't divorce someone you were never legally married to, she said. The words landed wrong. I'm sorry, what? If he was still legally married to his first wife, your marriage is void. It never existed in the eyes of the law. I laughed once, short and humorless. So what do I do? We file for a declaratory judgment, she said. A legal determination that the marriage is invalid. After that, we treat the situation like a dissolution of a long-term cohabitation. Meaning, I asked, already bracing myself, meaning assets still have to be divided. That was the moment anger fully arrived. I'm the victim, I said. He lied to me. He committed bigamy. I know, she replied gently, but the law doesn't care about morality. It cares about shared property. She started listing things out. The house we bought 5 years ago, both names on the deed, the joint checking account, the cars, years of intertwined finances, the retirement accounts accumulated during our time together. He may have a legal claim to half of what you built together, she said. Marriage or not. I felt sick, so he commits fraud and I still pay for it. Welcome to civil law, she said quietly. That afternoon, I went to the police station. The detective who took my statement didn't look surprised. Tired maybe, but not shocked. Bigamy cases are harder than people think, he explained. Most defendants claim misunderstanding. They'll say they thought the marriage ended, that paperwork got lost, that they were confused. He told me his wife was dead, I said. That helps, the detective admitted. But proving intent is still the hurdle. I filed the report anyway. I needed it documented. I needed the truth on record, somewhere official, somewhere he couldn't rewrite it. Back at the hotel, my phone buzzed constantly. Husband, please come home. Husband, we can work through this. Husband, I love you. I didn't respond. The next call came from his sister. What the hell is going on, she demanded. He says you're accusing him of being a criminal. He is a criminal, I said. Bigamy is a felony. There has to be an explanation, she snapped. He wouldn't do this intentionally. He did, I said, and I have proof. You're being cruel, she said. He made a mistake. A 12-year mistake, I replied. That involved my life. She hung up on me. The call from his mother came the next day. She was overseas, at least that's what I'd always been told, but her English was flawless, controlled, sharp. You are destroying my son's life, she said without preamble. He destroyed his own life when he lied, I answered. This is a private family matter, she insisted. You do not involve police. It's a crime, I said. Police handle crimes. In our culture, we forgive, she said. We work things out. Well, I'm not from your culture, I replied, and here bigamy is illegal. Silence crackled on the line. You want him to go to jail? She asked. I wanted the truth, I said. 12 years ago. She hung up. That night, I opened my laptop and started listing everything we owned together. Every account, every payment, every contribution. I saw the numbers clearly for the first time, not as symbols of a shared future, but as liabilities tethering me to a lie. I hadn't just lost a husband. I was about to lose half my life to someone who had never been legally free to marry me in the first place. By the time his family closed ranks, I was no longer surprised, just exhausted. There's a particular kind of fatigue that comes from having to repeat the same truth over and over to people determined not to hear it. It started with messages, then calls, then accusations disguised as concern. His sister tried again 2 days later, her tone softer this time, as if volume had been the problem before. You know he's not a bad person, she said. He just handles conflict badly. He handled it by lying for 12 years, I replied. You're blowing this up, she insisted. Do you have any idea what this is doing to our mother? I closed my eyes. Do you have any idea what this has done to me? She pivoted quickly. Why are you involving the police? That's extreme. So is committing a felony, I said. She exhaled sharply. You loved him. I loved who he pretended to be. That line ended the conversation. She hung up, and within minutes my phone lit up again, this time with messages from cousins I barely knew, people who had once toasted our anniversaries, now suddenly experts on forgiveness and discretion. Family matters should stay in the family. You don't air dirty laundry. He didn't mean to hurt you. Every message asked the same thing without ever saying it outright. Why won't you just be quiet? I realized then how neatly the story had been reframed. Not as a man who committed bigamy, but as a fragile son being attacked by a vindictive wife. I wasn't a victim anymore. I was a threat. His mother called again that night. This ends now, she said. Withdraw the report. No, I answered calmly. You are humiliating him. He humiliated me for 12 years. You are tearing this family apart, she snapped. I didn't lie, I said. I didn't commit fraud. I didn't trap someone in a false marriage. If your family is falling apart, it's because the truth finally showed up. Her voice hardened. You think you are innocent in all this? I laughed softly. I'm the only one who is. Silence followed cold, heavy final. After that, the calls stopped. Not because they understood, but because they'd decided I was the enemy. I'd crossed the invisible line between wife and problem. The loneliness hit harder than I expected. This was the family that had celebrated holidays with me, that had welcomed me in as a daughter-in-law. Now I was nothing more than a complication they wanted erased. My lawyer called the next morning. They've hired counsel, she said. Your husband is claiming common law marriage. I almost dropped the phone. That doesn't even exist in this state. It hasn't for decades, she confirmed. It's a desperation move, but it means more filings, more hearings, more money. Of course it did. When I checked the joint account later that day, my stomach sank. $8,000 was gone. Just gone. What can I do? I asked my lawyer. Nothing, she said. It's a joint account. He has access. I closed the account immediately and transferred the remaining balance to my personal checking. I documented everything, screenshots, dates, amounts. Minutes later, a text came through. Husband. Why did you close our account? That's financial abuse. Husband. I need that money for rent. You're leaving me homeless. I stared at the screen, the audacity almost impressive. You have $8,000, I typed back. Figure it out. That night alone in the hotel room, I finally understood the full scope of what I'd lost. Not just a marriage, not just money, but an entire support system that had chosen loyalty to a lie over accountability. I wasn't just fighting my husband anymore. I was fighting a family that would rather protect deception than face the truth. I thought I was already numb. I was wrong. The call from the detective came 3 weeks later, late enough in the afternoon that I'd started to associate the sound of my phone ringing with dread. I answered anyway. We've made progress, he said. And there's more you need to know. Those words always mean the same thing. Worse. They'd gone through his emails, messages, archived accounts, things he clearly never expected anyone to see. Threads he'd forgotten existed, conversations that filled in the gaps he'd carefully left blank for me. He knew, the detective said. He was aware he was still legally married when he married you. I closed my eyes, pressing my fingers into my temple. Part of me had already known this. Hearing it confirmed didn't bring relief, just a deeper, colder ache. There's something else, he continued. We found evidence of another relationship, another woman, between his first wife and you. My breath caught. What do you mean between? 6 months overlap, he said. He was still legally married to his first wife while involved with her. Then he left her and married you. No divorce, finalized in between. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed. So I wasn't the first, I said. No, he replied. This looks like a pattern. A pattern. Not a mistake, not fear, not confusion, a method. After the call ended, I stared at the wall for a long time, my thoughts unraveling backward. All those years I'd framed his secrecy as trauma, his evasiveness as pain, his insistence on privacy as something noble, something I should respect. I hadn't been understanding. I'd been convenient. The civil case moved faster after that. His lawyer proposed a settlement, $120,000 for his share of the house and a portion of my retirement account. I laughed out loud when my lawyer read it to me. He's a criminal. This is civil court, she reminded me. Judges don't punish. They divide. Going to trial would cost more than settling. More months, more money, more exposure. The math was brutal and unfair, but it was still math. We countered. He rejected it. We countered again. He rejected it again. Finally, we settled. $85,000 for his portion of the house. Nothing from my retirement, at least. But I had to refinance to pay him out. I lost money on a property I'd put more into. I signed paperwork with hands that felt detached from my body. When it was over, I didn't feel relieved. I felt emptied out. The detective called again not long after. We're moving forward with charges, he said. I sat very still. Seriously. Yes, he confirmed. This email's established intent. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was sustained deception. Vindication arrived quietly. No celebration, no satisfaction, just the faint easing of a pressure I'd been carrying in my chest since that first phone call. That night, I opened my laptop and reread parts of our life together. Photos, messages, notes I'd saved for sentimental reasons. Every I love you now felt transactional. Maintenance. Something said to keep the structure intact. I realized something then that hurt more than the betrayal itself. He hadn't loved me badly. He hadn't loved me at all. He had used me the way someone uses a stable job or a reliable car, something convenient that made life easier. And the worst part, he'd done it before. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Beige walls, fluorescent lights. Everything about it felt ordinary, which somehow made the situation feel more surreal. This was where 12 years of lies were being reduced to paperwork and legal language. He walked in a few minutes after I did. If I hadn't known better, I might have felt sorry for him. He wore a conservative suit, hair neatly trimmed shoulders, slightly hunched, as if the weight of the room itself was pressing down on him. He avoided looking at me. His mother and sister flanked him, one on each side, their faces set in identical expressions of outrage as if I were the one on trial. I sat alone. When the case was called, the prosecutor laid everything out calmly. The overlapping marriages, the false statements, the emails proving he knew, proving this wasn't confusion or fear, but a calculated decision repeated over time. His lawyer argued good faith misunderstanding, claimed emotional distress, claimed he believed the first marriage had ended in spirit, if not on paper. I felt my jaw tighten. Spirit didn't invalidate law. Love didn't erase fraud. When the judge finally spoke, the room went still. This was not a mistake, the judge said, looking directly at him. This was a pattern of deception spanning more than a decade, affecting multiple people. He cried then, quietly, head bowed. The image might have worked on someone who hadn't lived with him for 12 years. The sentence came down a few minutes later. 3 years probation, 200 hours of community service, $5,000 in restitution to me for documented losses, no jail time. That was it. I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, yes, but not shocked. The legal system doesn't do catharsis. It does minimums. His mother stood up immediately, shouting in another language, accusing the court of persecution. The bailiff escorted her out while she continued yelling, her voice echoing down the hallway. Outside the courtroom, his sister cornered me. I hope you're happy, she said, eyes blazing. You destroyed him. I met her gaze steadily. He destroyed himself. She laughed bitterly. You're vindictive. You never cared about him. I cared for 12 years, I said. He cared about convenience. She called me names I won't repeat and stormed off. I stood there on the courthouse steps afterward, papers clutched in my hands, waiting for something relief, triumph, closure. Nothing came. I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, hollow, like someone who had finished a long, brutal marathon only to realize the finish line wasn't an ending, just a place where you finally stop running. Justice had been served, technically. Emotionally, I was still standing in the wreckage. A few months passed after sentencing enough time for the adrenaline to fade and for reality to settle in properly. That was when the real aftermath began, not the courtroom version, not the legal filings, but the quiet accounting of what remained after everything was stripped down to essentials. The house sold first. On paper, it was clean. Mortgage paid off. Settlement wired. Numbers balanced the way numbers always do, indifferent to context. In reality, it felt like watching the physical proof of my former life disappear line by line. After his payout and closing costs, I walked away with about $75,000. It should have been almost double. Legal fees took another large bite out of it. Criminal consultations, civil litigation, financial advisors, every expert needed to untangle a life built on a lie had sent an invoice. All told, I lost close to $80,000. I stopped calculating after that. The restitution he was ordered to pay came in sporadically at first, then not at all. Missed payments. Excuses through his attorney. I could have pursued it, could have dragged us both back into court over a few $1,000s, but I didn't. I was done letting my life orbit his decisions. He lost his job shortly after the case became public. Finance firms don't tolerate fraud convictions even when the sentence is light. Last I heard, he was working retail and living with his mother. Consequences had arrived quietly, the way they often do. The woman who had called me first, his legal wife, reached out a few weeks later. We met for coffee. It was strange at first, sitting across from someone connected to me by deception rather than choice. But there was an odd comfort in it too. Shared context. Shared damage. "Did you ever notice the signs?" she asked. I nodded. I explained them away. So did I. We laughed softly at that. Not because it was funny, but because sometimes acknowledgement is the closest thing to relief. My own family struggled with it in a different way. My mother had loved him, treated him like a son. The betrayal cut her too, and I saw it in the way she asked questions she already knew the answers to. "How does someone lie like that for so long?" she asked one night over dinner. "I don't know," I said, but he did. I started therapy shortly after. Living inside a fabricated relationship rewires your instincts in ways you don't notice until it's over. I questioned everything, every memory, every choice. The therapist kept repeating the same thing until it finally began to sink in. It wasn't your fault. He was skilled at deception. Intellectually, I understood. Emotionally, it took longer. Dating felt impossible. I tried briefly. A few first dates, polite conversations, but I found myself analyzing every answer, every vague reference to the past. Exhausting. I stepped back. Healing wasn't something I could rush. I moved into a small, one-bedroom apartment. Nothing fancy, but entirely mine. I signed the lease with just my name on it. No shared accounts, no assumptions. That first night, sitting on the floor, surrounded by half-unpacked boxes, I felt something close to peace. I threw everything else away. Photos, gifts, that necklace with the ring he claimed belonged to a dead wife. All of it went into a trash bag and out of my life. People asked if I was bitter. Maybe a little. Mostly I was just tired. I started volunteering at a legal aid clinic, helping fraud victims navigate paperwork and options. Turns out relationship fraud isn't rare, it's just rarely talked about. Listening to other stories helped. Perspective always does. Some nights I still think about the diary the police found, how he wrote about the women in his life like interchangeable parts. Stable, convenient, makes things easier. That word still stings. Convenient. But here's what I know now. Convenience is not love, and silence is not peace. Trust doesn't mean ignoring questions. It means answers exist when you ask them. I'm 43. I should have been settled. Instead, I'm rebuilding. Slowly, carefully. With my eyes open this time. Not a happy ending, not a tragic one either. Just an ending, and the beginning of something honest. My name is Allison Beck, and I was 31 years old when I realized I had spent 3 years confusing emotional endurance with love. If you had asked me before that Tuesday night, I would have told you we were solid. Not perfect, but real. We met at a friend's barbecue. Nothing cinematic, just cheap beer folding chairs, and laughter drifting through the yard as the sun went down. He was magnetic in a way that pulled people toward him without effort. I was quiet or observant, the kind of person who listens more than she speaks. He noticed me anyway, or at least that's what I believed. We started dating a month later. By the end of the first year, he had moved into my apartment. At the time, it felt like progression, commitment. What I didn't notice was how quickly we became me handling things and him enjoying them. He loved attention, loved being wanted, loved feeling missed. At parties, he'd drift away from me, working the room, laughing louder than anyone else, then circle back just to make sure I was watching. If I wasn't, he'd tease me for being distant. If I was, he'd accuse me of being clingy. I learned to walk that invisible line without ever knowing where it actually was. The comments started small. How I should loosen up, how I wasn't fun enough, how his friends didn't really know me because I never put myself out there. I told myself we balanced each other, that I grounded him, that love didn't need to be loud to be real. By the time that Tuesday arrived, the arguments had become routine. Not explosive, exhausting. I forgot his dry cleaning. I didn't react enthusiastically enough to a story I'd already heard 3 times. I spent too much time editing photos instead of sitting beside him while he scrolled through reality TV. Each disagreement carried the same unspoken verdict: I was failing some test I hadn't agreed to take. That night, he came home from drinks with his friends, already irritated. I had texted him once earlier, asking if he wanted me to save him dinner. He said no. Apparently, that was the wrong answer. You don't even care where I am, he said, dropping his bag onto the couch like punctuation. Or who I'm with. I texted you, I replied, still looking at my laptop. You said you were eating out. 1 text in 4 hours, Allison, he snapped. That's nothing. You were with your friends, I said calmly. I was giving you space. He stepped directly in front of me, arms crossed, blocking the screen. That's the problem. You give me too much space. You don't chase me. You don't make me feel wanted. I closed my laptop slowly and looked up at him. What do you want me to do? Text you every 20 minutes while you're out. I want you to miss me, he said, voice rising. I want to feel like you can't stand being away from me. I trust you, I said. I thought that mattered. He laughed, sharp and humorless. You're always so perfectly fine. It's like I don't even register. There it was, the accusation I could never quite defend against being stable, being calm, being secure. He pulled out his phone, fingers flying. You know what he said? I'm blocking you, on everything, until you learn to miss me more. I stared at him, something settling in my chest instead of breaking. Good, I said. That saves me time. His face flickered. Shock, anger, disbelief. Before he dramatically blocked my number right in front of me and stormed into the bedroom, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. I sat there for a long moment listening to the echo fade. Then I opened my laptop again and started making lists. The first thing I noticed after he blocked me was how quiet the apartment felt. Not tense, not lonely, just still. The kind of quiet you only hear when you stop bracing for impact. I slept on the couch that night. Not because I was afraid to go into the bedroom, but because I didn't want to. I didn't want to lie beside a closed door pretending everything would reset in the morning like it always had before. When I woke up, there were no messages waiting. No apology. No dramatic unblocking, followed by a half-hearted, "Are you calm now?" text. Just silence. His silence was supposed to make me anxious, make me spiral, make me chase. Instead, it gave me something I hadn't had in months, space to think without reacting. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the familiar clutter that had slowly stopped feeling like mine. His jacket slung over the chair, his gym bag in the corner, his unopened mail stacked neatly beside my laptop as if responsibility itself knew where it belonged. That was when it hit me, how much of my life had been quietly absorbing him, accommodating him, cushioning him, while mine shrank around the edges. I opened a notebook and started writing, not feelings, not grievances, just facts. The apartment lease was in my name, utilities too. He paid part of the rent sometimes when it crossed his mind, but if he forgot, I covered it without a word, because it was easier than arguing. The car we shared was mine, paid off long before he ever sat in the passenger seat and complained about my music. Most of the furniture was mine from before we met. Even the couch he liked to nap on had been delivered years before he entered my life and rearranged it to suit himself. Then there were the things I hadn't agreed to. Sometime last year, he had added my name as a co-signer on a credit card for emergencies, something I only discovered when a notification popped up about a balance I didn't recognize. He had listed me as a reference for a job he never got without asking. Signed us up for a timeshare presentation because we had to start thinking like a couple who plan things. He had even told his parents we were talking about getting engaged, news that had reached me secondhand, wrapped in congratulatory smiles I hadn't earned. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself he was enthusiastic, forward-thinking, maybe a little impulsive. What I didn't admit was that each step forward had been taken with my name, my credit, my stability, never his. By Wednesday morning, the silence still hadn't broken. That was when I realized something unsettling. If he hadn't blocked me, I probably wouldn't have noticed how much control he thought he had. Blocking me was supposed to remind me of my place. Instead, it removed his ability to interrupt my decisions. I called the credit card company first. 40 minutes on hold, one supervisor, and a very calm explanation later, my name was removed as co-signer. The balance made my stomach tighten nearly $4,000 in 6 months. Charges for nights out I hadn't attended, clothes I'd never seen him wear, convenience masquerading as entitlement. The representative apologized. I thanked her. When I hung up, my hands were shaking not from fear, but from anger I had postponed for too long. Next came the timeshare company. They were less polite, insisting I'd agreed to something I had never signed. I told them evenly that I would pursue legal action if my forged consent was used against me. The tone shifted immediately. The agreement disappeared. One by one, I changed everything. Bank passwords, email, streaming services, subscriptions I hadn't realized he was logged into from devices I didn't recognize. Each reset felt like pulling a thread loose, watching a knot unravel without resistance. By Thursday, I called my landlord and gave notice. I told him I'd be moving out at the end of the month. He paused longer than expected, then said almost too quickly that he understood. I suspected he did. He'd dealt with my boyfriend's complaints about neighbors' demands for upgrades, irritation, over rules he'd never read. When I told him I'd already found another place across town, smaller, quieter mine, he wished me luck with a relief he didn't try to hide. Friday, I took a personal day and began packing. I moved through the apartment methodically, room by room, like someone preparing for a controlled burn. I packed my books, my clothes, my photography equipment, the kitchen tools I'd collected piece by piece over years. I left his things untouched. Not out of kindness, out of clarity. I wasn't erasing him, I was extracting myself. The longer I worked, the clearer it became that this wasn't impulsive. This wasn't punishment. This was overdue maintenance on a life I had let someone else clutter. He was still blocked, still silent. Somewhere out there, he probably thought he was winning. By the time the sun went down, my car was full, my apartment half empty, and my chest felt strangely light. For the first time since we'd moved in together, I wasn't waiting for him to come home and decide what the night would feel like. Silence, I realized, wasn't emptiness. It was leverage. By the time he decided he was done teaching me a lesson, I was already gone. Saturday morning started like any other weekend, used to sunlight through the blinds, the low hum of the city waking up, but I wasn't waiting for him to stumble out of the bedroom or check his phone for the exact moment he would unblock me and expect everything to reset. Instead, I was standing in my new apartment, coffee cooling on the counter, directing 2 movers as they carried the last of my things inside. They didn't ask questions. They never do. To them, it was just another job, half an apartment's worth of boxes, a couch, a bookshelf, framed photographs wrapped carefully in blankets. Efficient professional detached. I tipped them well. At 2:47 p.m., my phone buzzed for the first time in days. 17 missed messages, all at once. I didn't open them immediately. I already knew the arc. The first would be light casual, pretending nothing serious had happened. The next would test my silence. The last would punish it. He always followed the same pattern. When I finally looked, I was right. Hey, I think we've both had enough space now. Are you okay? This isn't like you. Seriously, answer me. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't care at all. I locked my phone and slid it into my pocket. Back at the old apartment, he would still think he had time. He would assume I was sulking somewhere nearby, waiting to be allowed back into the conversation. He didn't know that by the time he reached for his keys, there would be nothing left to argue over. Sunday morning, my phone rang. I answered this time. "Where are you?" he said immediately. "No hello," I replied. "Impressive." "Where are you?" he repeated, sharper now. "I came home last night and half the apartment is empty. Where's the TV? Where's the bookshelf? Where's—" He stopped. I could hear him walking from room to room, counting absence. "Where's all your stuff?" Silence stretched between us, heavy and unfamiliar. "What the hell does that mean?" he finally demanded. "It means I took my things and left," I said calmly. "The lease ends in 3 weeks. You'll need to figure out where you're going." "You're breaking up with me!" His voice jumped an octave. "Over a stupid fight. You blocked me and told me I needed to miss you more," I said. And I did. His breath hitched. "You can't just leave. We live together. We have plans. What plans? I asked. We were going to my sister's wedding next month. We were talking about getting a dog. You were talking? I interrupted. I was listening. There's a difference. He started crying then. Not loudly, not openly, the careful kind. The kind meant to activate guilt, to make you feel like you'd failed a test of compassion. I'd responded to it so many times before without realizing it was another form of control. I can't believe you're doing this, he said. After everything. After everything, I repeated, steady now. After you put my name on a credit card without asking. After you told your parents we were engaged when we never discussed marriage. After 3 years of making me feel like I was constantly falling short. The crying stopped abruptly. You went through my stuff, he said, accusation replacing hurt. I went through my financial records, I replied, and found your mess. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm not doing this anymore, I said. Lose my number. I hung up before he could respond. Then I blocked him everywhere, phone, email, social media, every door he'd once used to pull me back in. That night, sitting among half-unpacked boxes in my new place, I felt something unfamiliar settle over me. Relief. The quiet didn't last. At first, it came in soft taps, messages from people who hadn't spoken to me in months, framed as concern but edged with curiosity. Hey, are you okay? He seems really upset. What happened between you two? I kept my replies short and neutral. We broke up. I moved out. I wish him well. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain. I didn't correct the version of events I could already feel spreading without me. He filled the silence the way he always did with a story that cast him as blindsided and me as cruel. 3 days after the move, a message arrived from one of his closest friends. You really just disappeared on him. That's cold. I read it twice, then put my phone down. There was no version of my truth that would survive being filtered through loyalty and outrage. I wasn't interested in auditioning for understanding. Then his sister reached out. I don't know what happened, she wrote, but he's telling everyone you abandoned him. He's staying with our parents. He says he can't afford rent anywhere and doesn't know what he did wrong. I didn't respond. I felt the familiar pull to explain, to soften the narrative, to take responsibility for how uncomfortable the truth made other people feel. I let it pass. What I didn't expect was the reappearance of his ex-girlfriend. I heard about her through someone else first, how she'd been seen with him listening intently, nodding sympathetically. How she'd said things like, he always gives too much, and some people just don't know how to appreciate consistency. It was subtle, calculated, and perfectly aligned with the version of me he was selling. The woman who had once warned me about his need for control was now validating it, so long as it wasn't pointed at her. The pressure escalated a week later. A message from his cousin arrived late one evening, more hesitant than accusatory. I don't usually get involved, he wrote, but I'm concerned. He's saying you stole from him when you left. He's talking about filing a police report. I don't think that's true, but I wanted you to know. That crossed a line. I called him immediately. He sounded uncomfortable, caught between loyalty and reason. He says you took the TV, a gaming console, some furniture and jewelry that belonged to him, he said. I told him it sounded extreme, but he's really wound up. The TV is mine, I said. I have the receipt. The console is mine. The furniture is mine, except what I left behind. And I never touched any jewelry. There was a pause, then a sigh. Yeah, that's what I thought. He's escalating because I'm not responding, I said. If he files anything, I have documentation for everything. Good, he replied quietly. Stay safe. After the call, I didn't sleep. Not because I was afraid of him, but because I finally understood the scope of what I had walked away from. This wasn't heartbreak. This was reputation management. Control rebranded as victimhood. Silence reframed as cruelty. I spent the night compiling proof. Photos of my apartment from before he moved in, receipts for electronics and furniture, screenshots of messages from early in our relationship where he praised my place, joked about how lucky he was to land a woman who had her life together. I organized everything into folders labeled and time-stamped my calm, sharpening into something resolute. By morning, I drafted one final email from a new address he couldn't block. Subject: final communication. I have been informed you are considering filing a false police report. I have documentation proving ownership of everything I removed from the apartment. If you proceed with false claims, I will pursue legal action for defamation and harassment. This is the only warning you will receive. Do not contact me or anyone in my life again. I attached the evidence and sent it without hesitation. 2 days passed. No police report, no apology. Just a final message sent through his sister's phone. I just wanted you to miss me. I didn't think you'd actually leave. I stared at the screen for a long time before locking my phone and setting it face down on the table. Some truths don't need replies. 19 days after I moved out, an unfamiliar number lit up my phone. Are you even thinking about me? I didn't answer right away. I stood in the middle of my new living room, instead taking in how different it felt from the place I'd left behind. There were no half-finished projects scattered across surfaces I'd just cleaned, no noise bleeding in from someone else's moods. The walls held only what I chose to hang. The air felt lighter, like it hadn't learned how to brace yet. I walked through the apartment slowly, deliberately, as if I were documenting a crime scene that no longer existed. The empty space where clutter used to pile up. The kitchen without expired food I never bought. The bedroom with only my things arranged the way I liked them, untouched by compromise. I took one photo, then I sent it. No caption, no explanation. The 3 dots appeared almost immediately. He was typing, erasing, typing again. I watched it like someone observing a storm through glass, aware of the violence safely removed from it. My phone buzzed again, but this time it wasn't him. Hey, is this number still good? This is Michael. We met at that gallery opening last year. I'm texting because your ex just showed up at my place asking if I'd seen you. She said you two were on a break and she wanted to surprise you. It felt off, so I wanted to check if everything was okay. My stomach dropped. I typed back quickly. We broke up. She doesn't know where I live now, and I want to keep it that way. Got it, he replied. She's pretty upset. She showed me the photo you sent and said you're playing mind games. That's my new place, I wrote. She's blocked. Thanks for the heads up. No problem. She's asking a lot of questions about you. Thought you should know. I sat down hard on the couch, the reality of it settling in. The story he'd been telling had evolved. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was about reclaiming access by any means necessary, showing up unannounced, reframing boundaries as cruelty, painting persistence as romance. I turned my phone off and left it that way for the rest of the night. For the first time, fear brushed close, but it didn't root. I had done everything right. I had documentation. I had witnesses. I had distance. What he had was desperation. And desperation makes noise. Stop! Part 6. Quiet after the storm. The fallout came in waves, then tapered off into ripples. Mutual friends reached out cautiously at first, then less often. Some apologized outright. Others admitted they'd been told a very different version of events and were starting to see the cracks. I accepted the apologies without relishing them. Vindication wasn't satisfying. It was just sad how predictable the pattern became once I stepped outside it. I heard through the network that he'd moved back in with his parents 2 hours away, that the credit card debt caught up with him and he'd taken a second job, that his sister's wedding came and went with him, telling everyone I'd be there, then spending most of the night explaining my absence, that the woman he'd started seeing was already being accused of not trying hard enough, not missing him enough, not proving her affection on demand. I stopped checking for updates. My life, on the other hand, settled into something quieter and sturdier. Work, the gym, long walks with my camera capturing the city in pieces that didn't demand anything from me. Cooking meals because I wanted to, not because someone else expected them. Hanging my photographs exactly where I wanted them. I started seeing someone new casually, not because I needed to replace anything, but because it felt easy. There were no tests. No performances, no sudden disappearances designed to provoke reaction. We enjoyed each other's company without keeping score. I realized how unfamiliar that kind of calm had once felt, and how natural it was now. Sometimes my phone buzzed and my chest tightened reflexively, a muscle memory I hadn't yet unlearned. But it was never him. No random numbers, no messengers, no echoes. That chapter closed cleanly. I still have the photo, the empty apartment, saved on my phone. Not out of bitterness, but as a reminder. A reminder that manipulation only works if you keep playing. That silence when chosen can be an act of self-respect. That leaving doesn't have to be loud to be final. He wanted me to miss him. Instead, I missed the chaos. My name is Diana Newby, and I'm 36 years old. I've been married to Ray Newby for 5 years together for 7 in total, and until recently, I would have told anyone who asked that our life was steady, predictable, and quietly good. We owned a comfortable house in the suburbs, split the bills evenly, argued about paint colors and grocery lists, and talked about children, the way married couples do when they assume time will eventually cooperate. Children were always part of the plan, not urgently, not desperately, just inevitably, or so I thought. For the first few years, when nothing happened, month after month, we treated it like bad timing. Then came the tests, the specialists, the polite clinical language that reduced our future to numbers and probabilities. Everything came back normal, which somehow made it worse. No explanation meant no solution. IVF became the next step, and I remember thinking that if we had to work harder for this, then fine, we would. Together. Looking back now, that word together was already starting to mean different things to each of us. The shift didn't announce itself loudly. It slipped in quietly disguised as happiness. Last spring, Ray attended an alumni event for his university. When he came home that night, he seemed lighter than I'd seen him in months. He laughed more easily. He kissed me absent-mindedly while checking his phone, smiling at messages he didn't explain. When I asked who he was talking to, he said, "Just old friends. You know how reunions are." I did know. I let it go. That was the first time my instincts whispered something I chose not to hear. Over the following weeks, his phone became an extension of his hand. He'd glance at it during dinner, chuckle softly while brushing his teeth, turn the screen away without realizing he was doing it. I told myself I was imagining things. Married people don't spiral over nothing. Trust is supposed to be automatic. Then his ex-girlfriend, Lauren Mitchell, started appearing in our conversations. It was subtle at first. Lauren used to love this place. Lauren always hated spicy food. Little comments that felt harmless in isolation but heavy in accumulation. It was as if he was narrating memories I'd never asked to hear, holding them up next to our life, like comparisons he didn't realize he was making. Around the same time, our IVF conversations intensified, and something about them began to feel wrong. Ray wasn't excited about us having a child. He was excited about having a child full stop. He talked about efficiency, about success rates, about minimizing variables. When I talked about what it would mean emotionally, about how hard this process might be on us, he listened politely and then steered the conversation back to logistics. I couldn't quite articulate what bothered me, only that it did. 4 months ago, the truth found me when I wasn't even looking for it. My laptop had died, and I needed to print a document before work. Ray's laptop was open on the desk. I wasn't snooping. I clicked the browser and hit the wrong tab. What opened wasn't social media or email. It was a detailed email chain with a fertility clinic I had never heard of located hundreds of miles away. The subject line mentioned storage status. I read the words once, then again, then a third time slower as my hands began to shake. Frozen genetic material. A previous IVF cycle. Storage fees paid continuously for 7 years. With Lauren. The timeline alone made my stomach drop. These payments stretched back before we met. Through our engagement. Through our wedding. Through 5 years of marriage. All quietly maintained. All deliberately hidden. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I sat there in absolute stillness, reading every message, every date, every carefully worded inquiry about consent and logistics. Then I took screenshots, backed them up to a cloud folder Ray didn't know existed, closed the laptop, and said nothing. Because somewhere deep down I already knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the question he hadn't asked yet, the one he seemed to be working up the courage to bring to the table. And when he finally did weeks later, sitting across from me at dinner, with nervous hands and rehearsed calm, I would be ready. He didn't know it yet, but by then, I had already stopped hoping I was wrong. After that night, I learned how to live inside two realities at once. On the surface, everything continued as it always had. I asked Ray how his day was. We discussed bills. We watched the same shows on the couch, his arm occasionally resting on my shoulder, like muscle memory doing its job. If anyone had walked past our windows, they would have seen a normal, married couple moving through a normal evening. Inside me, something had gone very quiet. I didn't confront him. Not because I was afraid, and not because I was weak. I needed to understand the full shape of what I was dealing with. One hidden truth has a way of pulling other truths out with it, and I wasn't about to step into that conversation blind. So I watched. I noticed how often he checked his phone when he thought I wasn't looking, how his mood lifted after certain messages then dipped when replies took longer than he expected. I noticed how Lauren's name came up more frequently, now slipped into conversation, as if repetition would eventually make it harmless. "She always said that too," he remarked once, smiling to himself. I didn't respond. I just nodded, filing it away. At night, when he fell asleep, I lay awake, replaying moments from the past few years that suddenly made sense in a way they never had before. The vague answers, the unexplained charges on our shared account that he'd brushed off as old subscriptions. The way he'd once casually mentioned years ago that he and Lauren had looked into fertility treatments before their engagement ended, never specifying how far that process had gone. I realized then how carefully omission can be weaponized. He hadn't lied outright. He'd just never told me the parts of the story that would have mattered. A week after finding the emails, I called a lawyer. I didn't tell anyone, not my friends, not my family. I framed it in my own mind as a consultation, not a decision. A way to understand my options if things went where I feared they were heading. The lawyer listened quietly as I explained the situation, occasionally asking for clarification, occasionally pausing to let the weight of what I was saying land. When I finished, there was a brief silence on the line. "You're doing the right thing by documenting everything," she said finally. "Whatever happens next, you need to protect yourself." That word protect stuck with me. Over the next few weeks, I became meticulous, not obsessive, methodical. Screenshots of emails Ray accessed from our shared devices. Notes about dates and times when he left the room to take calls. Browser history that showed searches he clearly hadn't meant for me to see, questions about consent laws, donor agreements using stored genetic material from a previous partner. Each piece alone might have been explainable. Together they told a story he hadn't admitted to himself yet, let alone to me. What hurt the most wasn't the logistics. It was the realization that he had been planning a future that didn't include my full consent. He had already decided what our child's origin would be, already discussed it with someone else, already framed it as reasonable. I was the last person to be informed, and still some part of me hoped I was wrong, that there was a misunderstanding buried in the details, that when he finally brought it up, he'd frame it as a conversation, not a conclusion. Hope is a dangerous thing when it's fed by denial. The IVF conversations continued, but they shifted in tone. Ray stopped asking how I felt about the process and started telling me what made sense. What would be easiest? What would give us the best odds? He spoke with a confidence that suggested decisions had already been made somewhere else in conversations I hadn't been invited into. One evening, while clearing the table, he said casually, "We should probably talk more seriously about donor options." I looked at him then. Really looked at him. His face was calm, almost rehearsed, as if he were easing into a script he'd been practicing in his head for weeks. "Okay," I said. He smiled, relieved, misreading my tone entirely. That was the moment I knew the question wasn't if he would ask, it was when. And when he did, I wouldn't react emotionally. I wouldn't argue hypotheticals or defend my worth. I would let him say it out loud. Because sometimes the most damning thing a person can do is explain themselves fully. Once the silence between us was broken, it couldn't be repaired. After Ray mentioned donor options, the subject hovered over our house like humidity, unspoken, heavy, impossible to ignore. He didn't bring it up again right away, but everything he said in the days that followed circled the same idea, like he was laying groundwork, softening the edges before delivering the real proposal. I noticed how often he used the word practical. Practically speaking, success rates are higher if you minimize unknown variables. Practically, it's easier if the genetics are already documented. Practically, we shouldn't let emotions complicate something that's already hard. Each time he said it, something inside me recoiled. He was talking about our future like a business decision, not a shared life. I started replaying our earlier IVF conversations in my head, now armed with the knowledge he didn't know I had. His enthusiasm hadn't been about building something with me. It had been about reaching a result he'd already pictured, one that didn't require me in the way a marriage should. The comparisons became harder to ignore. "Lauren was always very organized about this kind of thing," he said one night, not looking at me. "She kept meticulous records." I set down the dish I was drying and stared at the sink until my vision blurred. He didn't notice. Or maybe he did and chose not to care. There was a growing sense that I was being evaluated against a version of a woman who had never fully left his life, that our marriage existed alongside a parallel narrative, where she still played a role, quiet, preserved, frozen in time, just like the genetic material he'd kept without telling me. At night, I lay awake, listening to his breathing, wondering how long he'd been planning this, whether the idea had formed gradually or if it had been there from the beginning, tucked away behind reassurances and vows. I wondered if on our wedding day he had already known about those storage fees, if he'd already decided they were none of my business. The thought made my chest tighten. I drafted questions in my head that I never asked. Not yet. I wasn't interested in half-truths or rehearsed reassurances. I wanted to hear him say it plainly without me leading him there. And then on a Tuesday night that felt painfully ordinary, he finally did. We were eating takeout from a Thai place we both liked. The television was on muted. Ray barely touched his food. He kept checking his phone, then setting it face down like he was waiting for a signal to begin. "I want to talk about the baby stuff," he said, finally pushing his plate away. My heart started pounding, but I kept my voice steady. "Okay." He took a breath the kind people take when they think they're about to say something reasonable. "I've been thinking a lot about IVF, about what makes the most sense for us." There it was, for us. "I think we should use donor genetic material," he continued, "specifically the samples that are already in storage." I set my fork down carefully. The samples from Lauren. He looked surprised that I didn't need clarification. Then his expression shifted, not to guilt, but to relief. "You know about that," he said. "Good. That makes this easier." Easier. He launched into an explanation he'd clearly rehearsed. The genetics were known. The medical history was documented. Lauren was healthy, athletic, intelligent. No major hereditary issues. She'd already agreed to sign over all parental rights. No legal complications. No emotional involvement. "It's just biology," he said. "It doesn't mean anything beyond that." I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man in front of me with the husband I thought I'd married. "You want me to carry and raise a child genetically connected to you and your ex-girlfriend?" I said slowly, "while you've been secretly in contact with her for months, while you've hidden this from me for our entire marriage, and you think that doesn't mean anything?" "You're making it weird," he replied, irritation creeping into his voice. "This is logical. You're letting emotions get in the way of a solution." I took a breath. The moment had arrived exactly as I'd imagined it. "That's an interesting request," I said. I walked to the hallway, and retrieved the envelope I'd kept hidden in my work bag for months. When I placed it on the table between us, the words, "Petition for dissolution of marriage," were visible immediately. The color drained from his face. "What the hell is this?" he demanded. "Divorce papers," I said calmly. "I've been carrying them for 4 months, waiting to see if you'd actually go through with this." The silence that followed was absolute. In that moment, I watched the version of our marriage he'd constructed in his head collapse under the weight of being seen. Ray didn't sign the papers that night. He stared at them for a long time, flipping through the pages as if they might change if he read them carefully enough. Then he looked up at me, with something between disbelief and indignation, like I had violated an unspoken rule he thought protected him. "You planned this," he said. "You've been pretending everything was fine while you were setting me up." I almost laughed. Instead, I said I prepared for reality. "You've been lying to me for years." That was when the tone shifted. First came the apologies. He reached for my hand, his voice dropping into something soft and familiar. He said he loved me, said he never meant to hurt me, said he'd cancel the storage, immediately cut off contact with Lauren, do counseling, do anything. He framed it as a misunderstanding, a poorly communicated idea that had gotten out of hand. Then, just as quickly, the apologies turned to accusations. "You're punishing me for having a past," he snapped, when I didn't respond. "You've been looking for an excuse to leave. You just don't want a baby as much as I do." I didn't engage. I gathered a few things and moved into the guest room that night. I told him I wouldn't be sharing a bed with him anymore, that the conversation was over. He didn't accept that. At 10 o'clock, I heard him on the phone, pacing the hallway. By 11, there was a knock at the door, hard, urgent, entitled. His mother. She'd driven 40 minutes in the dark to fix the situation. I knew that before I even opened the door. She didn't greet me. She demanded, "How dare you ambush my son like that, after everything he's done for this marriage?" I let her speak. Then I said evenly, "Everything he's done includes secretly maintaining frozen genetic material from his ex-girlfriend for 7 years, reconnecting with her behind my back, and asking me to raise a child that isn't ours, while pretending it's practical." Her face cycled through shock, confusion, and then settled into something colder. "That's not how he explained it," she said. "It's just a fertility solution. You're being emotional." "I'm being precise," I replied. "There's a difference." She waved her hand dismissively. "It's just genetics, like a donation. You're reading too much into it." That was the moment I understood this wasn't just Ray's delusion. It was inherited. I told her I'd be staying in the guest room while we sorted out living arrangements, that the conversation was over. Then I closed the door. From behind it, I could hear her voice rise, telling Ray I was cold, unfeeling, vindictive, that she'd never trusted me, that this proved I never truly loved him. The next few days were unbearable. Ray swung between remorse and rage like a pendulum. 1 hour, he was begging me to reconsider. The next, he was accusing me of destroying our family over nothing. His mother called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that grew more hostile by the day. His sister texted me once. He made one simple suggestion about fertility options, and you responded with divorce. You're actually unhinged. I didn't reply to any of them. I saved everything. Screenshots, voicemails, dates, times. I forwarded it all to my lawyer. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the worst it was going to get. I just didn't know yet how far Ray was willing to go to prove he was right. 4 days after the dinner, I came home from work and knew something was wrong the moment I opened the door. The house didn't sound empty. There were voices in the living room, low, careful, polite in a way that made my stomach drop before my brain could catch up. I set my bag down slowly, every step toward the sound feeling heavier than the last. When I turned the corner, I saw them. Ray was sitting on the couch. Across from him, holding one of my mugs, was Lauren Mitchell. She stood up immediately when she saw me, her expression flickering with discomfort. Ray followed too quickly, as if movement itself might diffuse what he'd done. "Diana," he said, forcing calm into his voice. "We just wanted to talk. Clear the air." I looked at him, then at her, then back at him. "You invited her into our house," I said quietly. "Into my home." "I thought if you met her," he said, already defensive, "you'd see this isn't romantic. This is just about the baby, about giving us options." Lauren cleared her throat. "I don't want there to be any misunderstandings," she said carefully. "I'm in a serious relationship. I'm not trying to get back together with Ray. This was never about that." I almost laughed. Almost. I turned to her. "Did he tell you I didn't know about the stored material until 4 months ago?" She hesitated, just a beat too long. "He said you were working through some resistance," she admitted. "That you'd agreed in principle and just needed time." My eyes snapped back to Ray. "I never agreed to anything I said. I found out you'd been hiding this from me for our entire marriage. That's why I filed for divorce." Lauren's face changed completely. What she asked, looking at him. "You told me she knew. You told me you'd talk this through." Ray opened his mouth, then closed it. For the first time since this began, he had nothing rehearsed. "I thought if you both talked," he said weakly, "it would help her understand." "Understand." Lauren stood up slowly, setting the mug down with shaking hands. "You lied to me," she said flatly. "You said this was mutual, that she was on board." "I never was," I said, "and I never will be." She looked between us, then shook her head. "This is messed up," she said. "I didn't agree to be part of this. I'm leaving." She didn't look at Ray when she walked out. She didn't say goodbye. The door closed behind her with a finality that felt earned. Ray turned to me, desperation flooding his face. He started explaining how he thought if I saw Lauren was normal, non-threatening, reasonable, I'd change my mind. How he believed bringing the woman whose genetic material he wanted me to carry into my living room would somehow fix everything. The level of disconnect was breathtaking. "I'm done," I said, completely. That night, something inside me settled. The anger cooled into clarity. Any lingering doubt dissolved. This wasn't confusion or poor communication or desperation for a child. This was entitlement. And he would burn everything down before admitting he was wrong. I thought the worst of it was behind me. I was wrong. A week after Lauren left my house and Ray realized he'd lost control of the narrative inside these walls, he took it outside. I didn't know that at first. I found out the way most people do now through a slow, disorienting shift in how others speak to you. Friends stopped checking in. Messages went unanswered. Invitations quietly disappeared. When people did reach out, their tone had changed, careful, concerned, vaguely judgmental. Then my phone rang. It was a cousin of Ray's, someone I'd always gotten along with. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "I don't understand why you're doing this," she said. "Ray told us you refused to consider donor options at all and flew into a rage. He said you've been hiding fertility issues and taking it out on him." I felt something hollow open in my chest, not surprise exactly, but confirmation. That night, the messages started coming in faster. His aunt, a mutual friend from the neighborhood, someone I barely knew from a holiday party years ago, all asking variations of the same question. Why was I throwing away my marriage over my ego? Why was I punishing my husband for trying to solve a medical problem? Ray's version was neat, polished, easy to swallow. According to him, I had serious fertility issues I'd been hiding out of shame. When he lovingly suggested donor genetics to help us have the baby we both wanted, I became unstable, controlling, cruel. I filed for divorce because I couldn't handle my own inadequacy. He cast himself as patient, rational, heartbroken. I didn't respond publicly. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself in group chats or social media posts. I did exactly what I'd been doing since the beginning. I documented. When people reached out directly, accusing or questioning, I corrected the record quietly. I sent screenshots, dates, email threads, proof of storage payments going back 7 years, messages showing Ray had been coordinating this plan long before he ever mentioned it to me. Not everyone apologized right away. Some people went quiet. Others doubled back sheepishly within hours. One message stood out. From his own cousin. Holy crap. He told us a completely different story. I'm so sorry. This is insane. The tide turned slowly but decisively. Ray didn't take it well. When his version of events stopped sticking, he escalated. He started telling people I'd fabricated evidence, that I was twisting his words, that he'd never specifically wanted to use Lauren's genetic material. I'd just assumed that because I was looking for an excuse to leave. The gaslighting was relentless. What he didn't understand was that denial only works when there's ambiguity. I had none. The emails were explicit. The questions he asked the clinic were detailed. The logistics he researched were specific. This wasn't interpretation. It was documentation. His mother went quiet for several days after someone in the family confronted her with the discrepancies. His sister stopped texting altogether. The people who mattered, the ones capable of critical thought, saw the truth clearly enough. Ray, meanwhile, seemed unable to stop himself. Every attempt to rewrite the story only revealed how deeply committed he was to not seeing what he'd done. That was when I realized something unsettling but freeing. He wasn't lying to protect himself from others. He was lying to protect himself from the truth. And once someone reaches that point, there's nothing left to salvage. 6 weeks after Ray first slid that practical solution across the table, the divorce was finalized. No dramatic courtroom showdown, no last-minute confessions, just paperwork signatures and a judge who had seen enough versions of this story to recognize it immediately. The house went on the market and sold faster than either of us expected. After the mortgage was paid off, we split the equity down the middle. It wasn't life-changing money, but it was fair. Our retirement accounts were divided according to the length of the marriage. We each kept our own cars and our own debt. No spousal support. The judge didn't even hesitate. Ray looked stunned when it was over, like he'd been expecting the universe to step in at the last second and reward him for believing hard enough. What surprised him most, I think, was that I didn't look relieved. I looked tired but steady. During discovery, the last pieces fell into place. Communication records had to be disclosed to establish timelines. That was when I learned Ray and Lauren hadn't just been texting. They'd met in person at least 4 times. One of those meetings happened in a hotel in a city 2 hours away on a weekend he told me he was attending a work conference. I didn't need proof of anything physical. In a no-fault state, it wouldn't have changed the outcome anyway. But the confirmation mattered to me. It explained the ease with which he'd crossed lines, the confidence, the entitlement. This had never been just about IVF logistics. It had never been just about a baby. It had always been about her. I shared that information with exactly one person, Lauren's current partner. He deserved the truth. A few weeks later, he reached out to thank me. Ray had explained those meetings away as closure and support. The messages and hotel records told a different story. They broke up shortly after. When I heard, I felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, just distance. Ray lost his marriage. Lauren lost her relationship, and the frozen genetic material they'd preserved so carefully was still sitting in storage, quietly accumulating fees, tied to a future that would never exist, an emotional anchor with nowhere left to attach. In the weeks that followed, Ray sent one final message from a number I hadn't blocked yet. I hope you're happy. You ruined everything because you couldn't handle a simple request. I didn't reply, because by then I finally understood what he still couldn't. The request wasn't the betrayal. The betrayal was the 7 years of deliberate hiding, the months of secret contact, the rehearsed lies, the willingness to decide my future without my consent, the expectation that I would shrink myself, rationalize his behavior, and accept whatever scraps of honesty he chose to offer as long as I stayed. He thought I was afraid of being alone. What he never understood was that I'd already been alone for a long time. These days, my house is quieter. The silence doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels honest. I don't wake up wondering what's being hidden from me. I don't parse conversations for inconsistencies. I don't brace myself for revelations that arrive disguised as logic. Some people will always tell this story with me as the villain, the cold wife, the woman who couldn't handle reality. I've made peace with that. The people who matter know the truth. I know the truth. And if there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this: preparation isn't cruelty, it's self-preservation. When someone shows you consistently, quietly, and repeatedly that they're living a double life, believing them isn't paranoid. It's being awake.